Hello, this is Glitterature Alley. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're an old regular, welcome back. I am Tootight Lautrec, the master mistress of Glitterature Alley, and here we are once again at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainders section of an unnamed local library, which may or may not have two attentive lions on the front steps, serving as perfect companions to this week's heartbreakingly beautiful selection for Pulitzer Who? Now in November by Josephine Wilson Johnson, which won the Pulitzer Prize for the novel in 1935, making Josephine Johnson the youngest person ever to win a Pulitzer. And she remains so today at 24 years old. And let me tell you, after last week's clunker, I am more than relieved, albeit slightly mystified, wondering how the same jury that chose this gem now in November also chose the prior year's selection, which was called something like Thorn in My Side or Stone in My Shoe or Bee in Her Bonnet, Poop in My Sandbox, Sand in My Crack, something like that. Or something like Lamb in His Bosom, which was the actual name of it. And all I have to say about that is, ugh. This week, we're going to be talking about Now in November. Before we do, let's take a look at a few of the other books that were published in 1935 and may have been considered that were published in 1934, which were then possibly considered for the 1935 Pulitzer Prize for the novel. And those include A Cool Million by Nathaniel West, Jonah's Gourdvine, Zora Neale Hurston's debut novel, The Mother by Pearl S. Buck, The Postman Always Rings Twice by James N. McCain, Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett, Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller, Work of Art by Sinclair Lewis, and The Young Manhood of Studs Lonigan by James T. Farrell. All of which sound like books that I would love to read. I have read one or two of them, but if I were to have seen this list, I would have readily picked up any of them because I was familiar with the titles or their authors. But had I looked at Now in November by Josephine Johnson, I would have skipped over it because I had never heard of Josephine Johnson, and I may have never picked it up were it not for this project. But pick it up, I did indeed do, and I am overjoyed that I done did it. Josephine Winslow Johnson, born June 20th, 1910. She lived until February 27th, 1990. She was a novelist, a poet, and an essayist. 5 of her short stories won O. Henry Awards. She was born in Kirkwood, Missouri. She attended Washington University in St. Louis, but did not get a degree. She wrote Now in November while living in her mother's attic on their farm in Webster Groves, Missouri. And she wrote many other books. She married, had 3 children, moved to Iowa and taught in Iowa City at the University of Iowa. Yay. And then she and her family settled to a farm in Ohio about which she wrote The Inland Island, which, having read Now in November, I now must read. It's a book of essays covering each month of a year on that farm. And look it up. You can see the reviews. I can't wait to read it. But we're not here to talk about The Inland Island. We're here to talk about Now in November, which is a novel about the Haldemarn family on a farm during the 10 years that comprise, in those 10 years, the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. The father of the family is Arnold Haldemarn. He's melancholic, anxious, burdened by debt, and rather short-tempered as a result of that burden. The mother is Willa Haldemarn. She's quiet, sensible, contemplative, and hopeful, and she's the real rock of the family. And then there are 3 daughters. The oldest daughter is Karen, who is wild and weird and energetically melancholic. She hates a lot of things, and she's more than just a little bit off, in my estimation. And then we have Margaret, the plain-looking but eloquently attentive narrator of our novel. And after her is Merle, who is not quite so plain-looking, but like Margaret is exquisitely attentive to the wonders that are around her. So, this is how it begins. Now, in November, I can see our years as a whole. This autumn is like both an end and a beginning to our lives, and those days which seemed confused with the blur of all things too near and too familiar are clear and strange now. It has been a long year, longer and more full of meaning than all those 10 years that went before it. There were nights when I felt that we were moving towards some awful and hopeless hour, but when that hour came, it was broken up and confused because we were too near, and I did not even quite realize that it had come. So, bam, right at the beginning, we get tension. We're in the Depression, we're about to enter the Dust Bowl, and we hear right at the very beginning that there will be some awful and hopeless hour. It's announced right at the very beginning, and so immediately I'm drawn in and I want to know what is happening and what is going to happen. This is what I was talking about that did not happen in last week's selection, Lamb in His Bosom. There was no story even glanced at in that book. And here we have, in this very first paragraph, a setup for a reader to want to keep reading. This idea that there is some awful and hopeless hour that is coming, and that she will be narrating over the course of the 10 years that she'll be talking about. So we're in the Depression, about to enter the Dust Bowl. The Haldemarn family has been forced to move from the city to the family farm, which hasn't been inhabited for a while, but which is also highly mortgaged. And the 2 youngest daughters, Merle and Margaret, are totally in love with the land and all of its wonders. And the prose in here is just absolutely stunning. But over everything hangs the burden of debt and the fear of losing all this beauty, all with the stroke of an auditor's pen. So there's worry, 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 and beauty everywhere. Possibly one good year could bring them out of debt, or maybe not. So they hope, and they work, and they fear. And that's what this novel is about. And into this environment of hope and work and fear steps a helper, a tall, strong, young, quiet man named Grant. So here we have this young, strong, quiet man named Grant among 3 young women. And sparks fly. But they aren't the kind of sparks that you would expect. They are muted, subtle sparks, sort of like fireflies over a field at night, going in all the wrong directions. And then this book becomes a tale of longing. Each character in here is longing for something or for someone with what seems like impossible hope. And with this longing comes the tension that I spoke about that was completely lacking in last week's Lamb in His Bosom. Here, well, in that book, it was overburdened with description. Here, description has a reason. All that beauty can be lost with the stroke of a pen. And I'm going to give you a rather somewhat, not too extended, but a description of the type of the way in which nature actually becomes a character. It's not just something pointed at and left. So this is Margaret speaking, obviously. At no hour did life suddenly change, nor was there any moment which could be said to have altogether made or altered us. We were the slow accretion of the days, built up like the coral islands of innumerable things. The moment of evening air becoming between the stove and the well outside, the sound of wind wrenching and winding in the sashes, the flesh of corn kernels, fear, fear of the lantern's shadow, fear of the mortgage, cold milk and the sour red beets, the green beans and the cornbread crumbling in our mouths, fear again, and the voice of Karen singing to herself in the calf lot, the sense of safety in mother's nearness, the calm faith that was in her and came out of her like a warmth around, the presence of each other and a lusty love of being, of living, and knowing there was tomorrow, and God knows how many more tomorrows, and each a life and sufficient in itself. We were added to by the shadow of leaves, and by the leaf itself, by the blue undulations across the snow, and the kingfisher's rattling scream, even when the creeks were frozen over. We were the green peas, hard and swollen, which Merle gathered late, so that what was earth in the morning would be gone into and swelling out the peas by night, making them bigger, and all through no trouble or expensive hours, which seemed an odd, almost too kind thing, like a miracle when none was asked. They were as much a part of us as the sight of white-boned sycamores flung up against the sky, or clouds driven like steam along the tops. In the thought and the strangeness of self, we could spend hours as traveling through a labyrinth, and it was a riddle sufficient in those days to keep the mind quick and seeking, hungry and never fed. And in the mystery of the turnip, you forgot the turnip leaf. And here we have a melding of the human characters and the life they live and their contemplative moments and the actual nature that is around them. There is no pointing at, oh look, there's a leaf, oh look, there's a stone. We were the slow accretion of days. We were the green peas. They were as much a part of us as the sight of white-boned sycamores flung up against the sky. The nature is a part of this story, and it's an active part in this story. It's an actor in this story too. And then I'm going to just give you a little bit more about the sense of dread that also comes in through this novel. This is Merle a little later on. I'm sorry, this is Margaret a little bit later on. I thought I was full enough of happiness to last for the rest of life, to cover forever after the things like that morning in the kitchen, the things that were warped and grew misshapen and made life seem like a nest of biting ants. And then it came to me, as it did at times, when the woods seemed all answer and healing and more than enough to live for, that maybe they wouldn't always be ours, that a drought or a too wet year, or even a year over good when everyone else had too much to sow, could snatch them away from us, and a scratch on a piece of paper could cancel 100 acres and all our lives. And this same sick fear came up again like a sly and smothering hand. So we've got tension, we've got beauty. It's just gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. All that beauty can be lost with the stroke of a pen. Excruciatingly beautiful novel. I will not give away what happens, but wow. Here we have a subtle, slow burn until it's not a subtle, slow burn, and it will stay with you like a scar. Qualms. I have none. What kept me reading or what stopped me reading? This book, I mean, on top of the fact that it's just gorgeously written and beautiful and the story is compelling, it also happens to be very short chapters and very easy reading as a result of that, which for lazy people like me, that's a good thing. It was just such a joy to read in itself. Just the reading experience itself, the physical reading of it was good. Sometimes I had to stop simply just to catch my breath because of all of that dreadful beauty that I was talking about in other books that we have read, and as I was talking about in another discussion about Ethan Frome. And then there were times when I had to stop reading just so that I could reread passages because they were just so beautiful. The tension around the fact that all that beauty could be lost kept me reading, because you have to wonder whose longings would be satisfied or thwarted, and how would that happen, and what might actually be lost, and how might it be lost. So, unless you haven't guessed it, the answer to the question, do I recommend this? The answer is I do. Since I started this project, there have been 3 big winners. There was Early Autumn by Louis Bromfield in this beautiful Franklin Library collection, and The Laughing Boy by Oliver Lafarge, again in this beautiful edition. And now in November, by Josephine Winslow Johnson. Gorgeous. So good. All of them. These are the top of my list so far. And if you ever wonder why, I'm sorry, I keep picking this up. If you ever wonder what I mean when I go on about the world is full of wonder, pay attention. If you ever have any questions about what that must be like, this book will show you exactly what I mean. It's almost like it was specifically written for me. Pay attention to Now in November. Until we meet again, I am Tootight Lautrec.